Welcome to Faith and Politics, a show dedicated to discussing issues surrounding the intersection of church, state, and politics, and the examination of whether you're allowing your faith to shape your politics or are your politics starting to shape your faith. In other words, what do you do when God and government come face to face? I'm your host, Orland Johnson. Let me introduce you to our guest panelists for today. First, we have Ms. Carmela Monk-Crawford, who's the editor of Message Magazine. We also have with us Ms. Melissa Reed, who's the Director of Government Affairs for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We have Ms. Bettina Krause, who's the editor of Liberty Magazine. And we have with us Ms. Jennifer Woods, who's the General Counsel and Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Lake Union Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Ladies, it's good having you here with us today and looking forward to our conversation. You know, there's a bill that was floating around out there in South Carolina that was talking about imposing the death penalty for individuals who are engaging in abortion. We all know that there's been some new laws that have been crafted in which Roe v. Wade has been turned back, and we now see that there are a lot of states that are actually starting to move forward, and South Carolina was one of them, in which they were basically saying any woman who is engaging in an abortion, there was going to be criminal charges, and it could also be a situation where the state lawmakers wanted to take that even further and to impose the death penalty on someone who's undergoing that procedure. You know, when you hear these type of pieces of legislation, and some of them will go up and some of them will go down, but it clearly looks like we have so many topics that people are trying to basically make decisions from. Some call it religious decisions, some call it political decisions, but at the end of the day, some of these decisions appear like they're gone a little bit too far. You know, when you take a look at these type of circumstances, and Jennifer, I just got to get your thought process on this. When you start seeing things that are talking about homicides for individuals who are engaging in activities that not too long ago was considered completely legal, where do you think that we're going? And is this more society just dealing with where it is at a certain point in its lifetime?
Well, you know, Orland, what I think is so interesting about this proposal is that it started off with around 24 sponsors, and we've seen the number of co-sponsors for this bill rapidly decrease because people are saying, wait a minute, so we may be pro-life, but we're willing to then kill a woman who chooses to have an abortion. I think they're starting to see just how kind of ludicrous this kind of legislation is. I mean, if you're going to be pro-life, then it really has to be pro everyone's life and not just to make a political statement, which I think people were trying to do by passing or by introducing this kind of language into the statute in South Carolina.
You know, Orland, I completely agree that this is just, politicking, unfortunately. I don't think probably even the individuals who remain attached to the legislation think that it has any sort of chance for passage. And I think that that's unfortunate. You know, I as someone who represents an organization and its interest on Capitol Hill, I think the legislative process is something to take very seriously, right? And so when we use the introduction of potential legislation in a way simply to just politic, I think that that's a misuse and, maybe even perhaps something stronger than that, maybe an abuse of what's going on. As Jennifer said, it's completely incongruous to say that the women should be penalized in this way for making that very difficult choice to end their pregnancy. And so, but we will see, as Jennifer said, we're not seeing a lot of traction, or we're seeing individuals jump off the bill, and we don't anticipate that it will become law in South Carolina. But at the same time, we are seeing similar pieces of legislation pop up around the United States as a result of the Dobbs decision.
You know, Bettina, what seemed a little bit interesting to me is that the bill was very clear on who would get the criminal charges. I didn't see a whole lot of language regarding those individuals who might have actually engaged in doing the abortion as being part of that conversation. It looked like the whole focus was on the person as opposed to even an entity or a person that may have also been part of violating the law. I mean, when you see this type of activity, what does it cause you to wonder, when you see things like this?
I tell you, Orlin, you have definitely identified one of the most disturbing aspects of this proposed legislation, and that is demonizing women, criminalizing women who are in very difficult, very challenging circumstances, and trying to reduce this debate, this discussion, this public policy discourse to a really one-dimensional perspective, rather than recognizing that this is a hugely complex topic. It touches on law, it touches on culture, health, religion, and we need to be able to talk about this in more than just caricatures, more than just, the caricaturing a woman as evil because she is engaged in procuring an illegal abortion. I mean, but this is where we're at as a society, and it demonstrates, I think, just how fragmented, even on the conservative end of the spectrum, this dialogue around abortion is. I mean, as Jennifer and Melissa both pointed out, even on the conservative end, there's been a lot of people speaking out against this piece of legislation. There was a Washington Post profile just this morning, 2 South Carolina senators, both pro-life, both keep the Bible on their desks. They both have very different opinions about this piece of legislation. So to me, it says, Orlin, let's not reduce this to a one-dimensional discussion, and let's not try to paint women in particular as somehow criminals because they're struggling with these questions.
Carmela, what's really troubling is the idea that we're starting to see individuals who are supposed to be serious about legislative activities starting to throw things out there just in order to have almost shock effect, without even the real aspect of being a legislator, in which people are pretty much putting you in to be their representative. When you make these type of statements or put this type of legislation out there, it's not just representing yourself, it's actually representing the people who sent you there as well. And, and how we juxtapose that and how we try to solve that is one of the things that I just have no idea how we're going to do that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Carmela?
It's horrifying to see how they threw everything to the wind to see what would stick. As you read the news stories around this, you see that several of the people who backed out, just as Bettina has said, I have different people who have identified themselves to their voter base as a Christian conservative, a Second Amendment Christian, a pro-life Christian. And that being said, okay, that's fine. But then they have to back up and say, I'm sorry, I didn't even read this. I didn't know there was going to be a death penalty assigned to this. This, people, should make all of us a little worried. This is who is representing your interest. And I will tell you one other thing, Orlin, the thing that concerns me so is not just what is suspicious as you look through this proposed legislation, but it starts out invoking the name of the Lord, so that if you are a faith believer, they're signaling to you, listen to what we're saying because we're on God's side. And so the very beginning, this is the General Assembly finds the following: acknowledging the sanctity of innocent human life created in the image of God. They're churning out new language that has these talking points and dog whistles that says, hey, come follow us because we're leading the way. But they don't have your best interest at heart. And I'll say this last little thing regarding abortion. I'm always suspicious. Yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm suspicious because we're looking at a case of unclean hands where people walk into this debate who have ulterior motives, many of them cut against Black and brown people such as myself, right? And so you see people coalescing together on similar conservative issues, and abortion is one of them, not just for abortion's sake, but for the sake of gathering more people into their big tent so that they can enhance their power base.
Melissa, I got to ask you this. One of the things I'd love to see is that if you were initially attached to a bill, you don't get to run away from it. You actually have to stick with it and ride it out to the end and allow the circumstances to kind of play out. I mean, to me, that may actually help some of this to slow down. There are folk who just like to jump on, and as soon as they think that there's heat, they jump out. They're just, setting up trial balloons. Is this any way to be running a federal government or a state government?
So, Orlin, what is it your parents always said to you? You've made your bed, now you need to lie in it. I mean, yeah, I think that would be interesting to say the least, and probably we would get a lot more continuity and probably a lot less bill sponsorship, right? If that was the actual situation, if there were some consequences. But I mean, I think, again, it's very telling because individuals elected to represent their constituency felt very comfortable attaching their names to it until they received bad press. And then they jumped right back off. And I think, that's not, while it might be understandable as far as from a political motivation, I don't think that that's what they're called to do as legislatures. I think that they're called to represent their constituency. And maybe if they're having to jump off legislation, they need to get to know their constituency a little bit better.
I was going to say, thank you. Get to know your constituency a little better. Look at the representatives. All Republican. 23 of the original sponsors were originally they were Republican. 20 of them were men. All were white. Who is the constituent base that put these representatives in there? You have to worry. You have to wonder what's happening.
But when you look at a state like South Carolina, you talk about a confusing state. There are some people that say, listen, this is a very conservative state. They seem to go down one line. But this is the same state that had a woman of Indian descent that actually was a governor at one point. They have an African-American Republican senator there. I mean, on some instances, you see some very progressive activities happening there. And then on the other instance, you see this flip side. You can't even get to a point, unless I'm missing something, Jennifer, where you can even look at a state and really even guess what they're really all about anymore.
No, this is true. And I think in this instance, what frustrated me a lot is that it seems like people got on this bandwagon of, okay, we're going to follow along the lines of like the Dobbs decision. Everyone seems to want this. And it's like they could have been spending their time doing something more productive for the people living in South Carolina. And instead, they've wasted taxpayer dollars and time working on this. And it's like, wasn't there something else they could have been doing during this time? But instead, they said, "Oh, we're going to jump on this hot button issue because that's what our constituents want," and they were wrong.
The irony of all of this is, if you had 20 members that jumped out in a 100-member organization, 1/5 of the group decided that this was a good idea, and decided not only was a good idea, let's put it on paper, let's move forward with it, let's sign our names to it. I guess it just begs the question: are we gotten to a point where your politics is always going to be involved? And faith is just an easy way to protect yourself and claim that as protection.
I was just going to agree with Bettina. She made that point as far as this is what happens when you have one-dimensional dialogue. And that's exactly what we're seeing, because again, when the public discourse, became engaged in this conversation and asked those tough questions about, okay, we all believe that we're created in the image of God and, do dignity and compassion and respect. Well, what about the individual? What about the mother? When you move the conversation on from that, just surface layer conversation, then that's where you have people backpedaling.
Melissa, I'm going to have to let that be the last word, but that's exactly right. If we don't find ourselves in the right situation at the start, we will find everybody backpedaling. But hopefully we'll end up being just a better nation and hopefully better legislatures moving forward. There's another interesting case, where we're trying to figure out, is it more politics or is it really more legislative law? But in this case, it's called Vitagliano versus the County of Westchester. Here we have a woman who is a devout Catholic and an occupational therapist for children that has special needs. And she felt that it would be a good idea to offer compassionate face-to-face support to women who are considering abortion. But a new law in Westchester County in New York makes it illegal for Debra to engage in even polite conversations. In November of 2022, a suit ended up being filed in federal court. And really what ended up happening is that we couldn't get to a final decision on what made more sense, but the court really decided that no sidewalk counseling for women would be a good idea. When I take a look at these type of cases, and lots of times we think to ourselves, we understand the law, we also understand what's common sense, but maybe there is no way for both of those two to peacefully coexist. Bettina, when you see a case like this and we're trying to figure out, what makes sense, we understand that there are laws that have to be followed, but there also has to be some nuances or policy objectives that really are supposed to work in conjunction with the laws, or maybe I've got something wrong here. What's your thoughts on that?
No, you're absolutely right, Orlin. In cases where there are two seeming competing rights, you get all these difficult nuances that the courts have to engage with. And here, clearly, there's a right to free speech, not having the government suppress or chill expression or to discriminate on the basis of what you're saying, the content. And on the other hand, the right of those entering a medical clinic to be left alone, to be free of the sort of harassment or nuisance value that that sort of activity may bring. But, having said all that, Orlin, I think what this case actually is focused on is something else. And that is a desire to have our current more conservative Supreme Court review these so-called buffer zone laws around abortion clinics. Because these laws are guided by a 23-year-old precedent, Supreme Court precedent, Hill versus Colorado. The court upheld the constitutionality of these buffer zone laws. They said that, the government can place some restrictions on time, place, and manner of speech. But I think this case is more about trying to get our current Supreme Court to take another look at those so-called buffer zone laws.
Carmel, I got to ask you, though, one of the interesting statements in this case was Debra is motivated by her faith. It seems to me that sometimes that faith is starting to act as a cover. If we've got the right to free speech and you decide that you want to engage in something from a First Amendment standpoint, it seems sometimes that by bringing in religion, it almost feels like maybe it's giving you an extra card to play that would cause somebody to say, well, that's one thing, but it's also religious. Do you ever get that feeling sometime? Because sometimes it makes me wonder, is it going to cause religious organizations to have even more problems because there's this sense of entitlement sometimes that comes with these type of statements?
Oh, absolutely. This is one of those things where there is a sense of entitlement. It's not just that I get to express my viewpoint. It's that I get to express my viewpoint to you as you walk into an abortion clinic, not just express my viewpoint when you're walking to the abortion clinic, but also to be within 8 feet of you, because that's what I need to be able to practice my faith. I need to be able to enter into the buffer zone. I need to be able to enter into your personal space to make my case about abortion. I love the little line here in the document that I found on the Beckett Law Fund page. It says, effectively, the buffer zone would effectively make it impossible for counselors to offer resources to women in need, which, come on, they have plenty of options. It's just that buffer zone. And just because you play the religion card does not mean you get to come in and insert yourself into someone else's personal decision making.
A lot of this, Melissa, almost makes it seem as though people want to jump past the legislative process and get right over to the judicial process. If you think you've got a court system that's in the right direction or what you're looking for, then ginny up activity that can get you into court so that hopefully, you're the home team and you got basically, a good judge that will give you the right decision. Are you sensing that when you're on Capitol Hill? And how do you try to balance against that type of activity?
Yeah, I think that's unfortunate. We do see, as much as we wish that it wasn't the case, that it depends on the jurisdiction that you're in, whether or not your position or perspective will be received favorably or not. And that's certainly, as you said, unfortunately, the law is supposed to be neutral. But talking about the law itself, this Westchester County law, again, Carmela mentioned, it sounds like a reasonable law to me. It says it establishes a 100-foot zone around abortion clinics, prohibits anyone from approaching within 8 feet of a person in order to provide information or counseling unless given express consent. So again, if they're given consent by the individual, if the individual wants to engage in the conversation, if the individual, but what this case is saying is that because I'm motivated by my faith, I have more rights than you do. And I think that that's really unfortunate. And I think to refer to this as not allowing polite conversation when what was described as the individual was holding up signs talking about the impacts of abortion and things like that. I mean, let's call this what it is. I have a particular perspective and I want to force that perspective on you.
Melissa, it's interesting because you went to what the law said. And as I was reading this case and I looked at the Hill case, I was like, wait a minute, these are almost identical, right? The laws. And so it goes exactly what Bettina said. And it's like, you're trying to get another bite at this apple on the exact same facts just because you think you have a more sympathetic ear in this instance. But, I agree that it looked completely reasonable. And I'm saying, under what basis? Why, is the exact same fact pattern? What's different here?
But I think what is different here, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bettina.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to sound a note of caution, though, because free speech rights are vital. I mean, they're vital for the functioning of democracy. They're vital for religious freedom. In this situation, we're coming at it from a certain perspective, and what we're saying may sound like we're not maybe embracing free speech, the importance of free speech as much as we should. But, from a religious freedom perspective, the ability to stand in a public space and to share your faith, for instance, is an important issue. And there's a whole line of Supreme Court decisions focused on religious proselytism in public spaces. So, we need to be careful and calibrate our response to this particular case, which seems so egregious. It seems like harassment. But we need to be careful that we don't overstep, we don't, take on too much in a way that undermines another fundamental freedom, which is free speech.
I agree with you, Bettina, but I think that it's almost a disservice to try to move forward cases like this when we do know that we want to make sure that free speech can be protected, that we will have the right to be able to share and proselytize. And I think this is almost a disservice because people look at this and they're saying, this, people see it more like harassment than peacefully sharing information or counseling. So I think that's where it kind of rubs at least me the wrong way.
Well, I got to tell you, from my perspective, when I hear these type of matters, and I remind people, your ministry changes not on who you think you are. Your ministry changes on who do they say that you are. So you may be thinking you're helping, but if they say that you're harassing, guess what? You're harassing. And so the real question is, how do we try to find the right balance again? That seems to be the word that we're always looking for here, because this case starts off talking about she is devout and she's Catholic and she's an occupational therapist for children. It seems like it starts out to try to set a narrative that can make you feel comfortable with the fact that she probably is being compassionate. So the real question I'm trying to figure out is, the narrative sometimes drives the answers. And if we can get rid of some of this narrative that's basically, in my opinion, just starting to distort your viewpoint possibly, then maybe that's part of the issue.
Right. Well, isn't it true that you've got a buffer zone when you go into your polling place? Isn't there a certain time or a certain area after which a person who is advocating for their candidate has to fall back? There's a buffer zone when people go out to smoke a cigarette, for crying out loud. When a person is walking into a clinic at one of the most critical and I would argue very personal and emotional time of their life, here's a person who needs to assert their right for their right of speech in your crisis. I think that's problematic, very problematic.
Orlin, I have to wonder, what motivates change for individuals? To me, it's not being bullied, right? To me, it's when I have a relationship with someone, when perhaps I'm seeking them for counsel. It's not when I'm being, as I have already made a decision, being, harassed and so I guess I wonder, I absolutely do not doubt the sincerity of this individual's, faith convictions. But I wonder again, like, what does she think that motivates change, or individuals that participate in this activity? Have there been enough responses that are positive that's why they're continuing to engage in this manner? It seems like, again, there's so many other ways that we can engage individuals that are going through these very personal decisions.
Well, sorry, go ahead, please, Carmela, go ahead.
I'm sorry to jump in, but I read the book Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson some time ago. This whole thing, by analogy, kind of relates to how he talks to a young person who is there getting their last meal before execution, and it's such a hollow gesture. At that last moment, what do you want to eat? Where was everyone when you didn't have anything to eat when you were a child? Where was the support for your family? Where was the school? Where's the criminal justice system? Likewise, here, they are setting up, this is impossible to be able to counsel someone in this moment. I believe that not only would Debra and everyone else be involved, their efforts would just as well be furthered if they took the time to think about what puts a person in that position. Studies show that most of the people who are seeking abortions don't have the funds to bring someone else into their family. How about you contact or work on issues of poverty, work on issues of well-being for the family, to shore up the family, make sure that people have access to healthcare, access to money and education and food. Then let's see where we go after that.
Carmela, I'm going to have to let that be the last word on this, but the point is well taken. We have to look for people from a holistic standpoint and hopefully try to find them at other stages of their life and hopefully make a difference. Carmela, tell me something I don't know.
Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida opened up the National Religious Broadcasters Convention earlier this year. Very interesting. Evangelicals are watching him because they believe he represents their views.
Wow. Melissa, tell me something I don't know.
Okay, Orland, the case that we just discussed came out of Westchester County. And did you know, I'm sure you know that the first American golf club is in Westchester County. But did you know, and you should know, Westchester is also the home of the U.S. Tennis Association.
That I didn't know. Tina, tell me something I don't know.
Orlin, a little fact from history for you. Did you know that the very first free speech trial in history was in 339 BC? The trial of Socrates in ancient Athens. And we know that ended badly for him and for free speech.
Jennifer, tell me something I don't know.
Sure. So looking outside of the U.S., did you know that recently the United States Commission of International Religious Freedom issued their report, and they found that there are worsening religious freedom conditions in many countries. In fact, they're recommending placing at least 11 countries on a special watch list because of persecution of religious freedom.
Thank you very much, ladies. Well, I appreciate your comments for today and looking forward to seeing, how this all pans out in the future. Thanks again for being here with us. Hope you enjoyed our conversation. Just remember, if it's about God and government, it's faith and politics. See you next time.